Hello. In this video, we're going to be covering a topic that's crucial as you move from beginner level Python development into intermediate level. So as a beginner in Python, you're going to be really focused on just getting the job done. There's something that you want to do. You define, maybe like we're doing here, some seconds that you want to convert into hours, and you figure out what is required to convert those seconds into hours. And then if you have multiple values of seconds to convert to hours, you might just go line by line. And once you get this process working for one single iteration, you might copy and paste that and just brute force your way to the solution that you need. I know for myself, this was really common when I was learning Python. You have a script or you have a Jupyter notebook, and you just do whatever hacky solution you need to get there, to get to the finish line. So what we want to cover in this video is there a better way for you to get to that finish line? You won't be wheezing and out of breath when you get there. You'll be flying to that finish line with plenty more energy to spare. It's a scalable solution. So we want to move from this kind of spaghetti code, unstructured, line by line execution into a more organized, scalable, smooth ride of execution. So for this example, we've defined some seconds. We have 4 different values that we want to convert from seconds into hours. We've also defined here how many seconds we have per minute, how many minutes we have per hour. And if we look at any given iteration of this conversion process, we are using the same operation over and over again in each iteration. And we are also, in order to make our lives easier to interpret the results, we're doing this user-friendly print statement. And that print statement is really repetitive. We can see we basically just have the same command as many times as we have values that we need to convert. So this works, this gets us to the finish line. But let's explore how we can move away from that line by line iteration, move away from manual execution of the same code into a little bit more organized approach. So as we move from the spaghetti code mentality into a automated kind of function approach, organizing our logic, one benefit is going to be that we don't have to write as much code in the long run. You are going to invest time into thinking, what logic do I need to do here? What do I need to pass into that function to make this happen? What operations need to happen within that function to get the result I need? And then we can see that in this situation, what that looks like is, okay, we've defined a constant here. That's the number of seconds we have per hour. So 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour. We also define a function. So this function is converting seconds to hours. With our function names, it's nice to be explicit about what you're doing. So this function makes sense. There's no mistaking what this does, converts seconds to hours. We also want to be very clear about what needs to be, what are the ingredients that this function requires to work. So we've used type hints here, or a type hint that tells us this argument that you would pass into the function is called seconds. And by the way, seconds should be a numerical data type. So floating point, we could call this number could be 4, it could be 4.3, 4.75, whatever. It's just a numerical floating point value. And finally, once this function is done executing, it's going to return to us a floating point value. So you pass in the number of seconds and you get returned the number of hours. So the internals of this function, it's going to say our seconds converted to hours is the number of seconds divided by the seconds per hour. So that's 60 times 60. And then we're going to round this to 2 decimal places, just for convenience. Now we also have the same print statement that we saw before when we were running this stuff, in sequence line by line. So we still want to see that nice user-friendly output. And then at the end of the day, we want to return what is that actual value, those seconds converted to hours. So that's what this function does. And we can see that Now, rather than copying and pasting, this same print statement over and over and over again, and the same operation over and over again, we just pass in to this function the number of seconds we want to convert, and we end up seeing the result. But this is still not quite as scalable as it could be. Imagine if you wanted to move from converting, a handful of values. Now all of a sudden you need to convert hundreds of values. Maybe you need to convert thousands of values, millions of values. Well, definitely in this kind of line by line approach, that's going to be a massive headache. You could be sitting here for days just copying and pasting this code, defining your variables. And then, what if the next week you have another set of 1 million values and you just have to manually go in and change each one of these variables? That's just a massive headache. And that headache isn't that much better if you have this approach, because, we have to go in, let's say we have result 5. Okay, now you have to type in result 5 equals convert seconds to hours of, another value. It's not really scalable. So let's see how we can kind of take this to the next level and make it a bit more scalable, which again, as you're going from beginner to intermediate, you really want to be in that mindset of, am I doing things repeatedly in a manual way? If you are, that's going to be a really good indication that, oh, maybe there's some logic here I could push out into a function, and maybe I could use some tools at my disposal here with Python, like iteration, loops, and I can loop over some values and define a repetitive process, so I don't actually have to manually repeat these tasks. So here we're going to make use of a nice built-in support for type hints. We're importing this thing called list. This is just a really nice way for us to, let's say we write this function and then someone else we're working with is going to be reading our code, interacting with our code, or you are going to be reading this down the road. You could really easily figure out what this function's doing. You are converting a list of seconds into hours. What do you need to pass into this function? Well, you're passing in seconds list. Well, what is this? Because we've done type hinting over here, you can see this is a list. A list of what? A list of floating point numbers. Okay, what we are going to get out of this function is, what we get back, what it returns to us is a list of floating point numbers as well. So we pass in a list or an array of seconds, and we get back a list of hours. So the internals of this function, we define this kind of empty basket that we call hours list. So an empty list here. And as we iterate over the various values of seconds that we passed in, we are going to perform the conversion from seconds into hours. Then we are going to append the actual result of that conversion into what began as an empty basket, an empty list, but then collects these values as we go. So we do this, and also bear in mind that this convert seconds to hours function from up here, this is going to be printing out that user-friendly output that we like to see. So we can define this function, we can pass in an array or a list of seconds values that we define, and we can see our results. Now, the nice thing about this approach is, yes, you invest some time up front into thinking about what logic do you need to live in these functions. You have to define those functions correctly, and once you get that logic nailed down, you benefit from this in an almost infinitely scalable way. So let's say we need to do another conversion. We have a new number here of seconds that we want to convert to hours. Well, that's easy to do the conversion. You can just keep scaling this up, and you save so much more time compared to if you had this approach where you're just copying and pasting the same calculation, the same process over and over again. So hopefully this is helping someone out there who's on that kind of path from beginner level Python to intermediate, and this sparks some kind of ideas of, okay, you have a manual process, you're getting the job done, but you can actually move some of the repetitive pieces of that process out into functions, keep your logic a little bit more organized, make it to where in the future, if you need to tweak anything, you only have to tweak it in one place, and in that way, make this whole process more scalable.